Chapter 8 The Swimming Lesson. The next morning, Shunsuke had an early lunch to take Kyoichi and Jiro to the river. It was at ebb tide. A vast sandbank was shining dark brown under the cloudless sky. With the two boys, he walked slowly through the reeds where the warblers were chirping noisily till they came to the sandbank. They enjoyed picking small mussels, digging holes, and so on. Jiro lay at full length on the sandbank. How pleasant it was to feel the coldness of the water oozing up from the deep down. When a dragonfly flew over his face, he felt so impressed as though he saw it for the first time. Fascinated, he was looking up at the speckless sky when he recognized something small and dark in the sky. It looked like a tadpole. He focused his eyes to see it better, but it would disappear very soon. Again and again did he try to focus his eyes to follow it. Finally, the image of Utsuru appeared up there like in a dream. Jiro closed his eyes. The members of Ohama's family came to his mind's eye by turns. He was thinking of that gloomy room where he had lived with them. The nostalgic mood made him forget completely that his father and brother were sitting close by. "Let's have a swim," said Shunsuke abruptly and began his own limbering up exercise. As he stood with his legs astride and hands on his knees, he pounded on the sandbank with one foot and then with the other. "I suppose you can swim well, Kyoichi," said Shunsuke. "Not so well, father." Let me see how well you can swim," he said. "Go ahead." Kyoichi waded into the water timidly till he was up to his breast when he tried his paddle-like stroke towards the bank, struggling about 2 meters. Jiro watched his brother earnestly. "Well done. You've made good progress, Kyoichi," said Shunsuke. "All right, it's your turn, Jiro." At these words, Jiro drew back, looking anxiously at his father and the water. "Don't worry, Jiro. I'll help you," he said. Jiro was slowly taken to the deep water as his father supported his stomach. He felt terrified and yet somehow relieved at the treatment. "Come on," said Shunsuke. "Kick as hard as you can. No, it's not good to paddle with your hands alone. Good, good. That's it. Oh, you mustn't raise your head so high. Never mind if you drink a bit of water. You won't die." Shunsuke helped him go ahead little by little as he ushered Jiro's body splashing in every direction. Jiro kicked out desperately in delight. However, his happiness did not last long. The supporting hands suddenly went off from under his stomach. Instantly he raised his face up, but it was too late. His body went down by gulping salty water. He felt an acute pain through the back of his nose to the top of his head. He did not know at all how he behaved after that. It was nothing but a desperate fighting against the water. His struggle came to an end in a few seconds, though. In fact, he was just wiggling where the water was no deeper than his waist. He could stand on his feet. "Ha ha ha! How did you enjoy your first lesson, Jiro?" said Shunsuke. Jiro felt like crying, but his father's laughing made him to stop it. As he spat out the water, he sniffed hard to cover his miserable feeling. "Don't raise your head with your mouth open like that," said his father. "It will only help your body sink. Be bold enough to hold your breath and go down. Look, I'll show you. Putting his head in the water, Shunsuke let his balloon-like body float like a frog. Right? He said, washing his face with his palm. Your body will float of itself if you hold your breath and lie still. Then you move your hands and legs. You raise your head last. Understand? All right, why don't you try it again? Jiro could not say yes, but walked to a shallow place about 10 meters away from his father. Then he practiced to stick his head in the water all over again. Shunsuke was watching it with a smile. At first, Jiro could only hold his breath for 2 seconds or 3, but as he went on, he could hold it for 5, 6, and more, say as long as 10 seconds. Look at me, father, I'll do it again, Jiro said and walked to the place where the water was as deep as his navel. He tried floating by stretching out his limbs like a frog does. He could not float so well as his father, but after several attempts was able to keep himself afloat in some way. Then he started moving his hands and legs desperately, raising up his face from the water. His father kept watching him for half an hour or so, despite the burning sunlight on his back. Jiro did not learn to swim with his face up after all, but managed to go ahead about 5 meters as he dipped his head down in the water. We'd better stop now, Jiro, said Shunsuke. That's all for today. You could do it better than your brother next. Jiro's endeavor really surprised Shunsuke, who had to restrain his son in the end. Jiro was disappointed to be forced to stop halfway, but there was no choice for him, for his father started for the bank with Kyoichi. Jiro ran after them hastily. That evening, all the family gathered at the supper table, which was unusual for these days. Even the grandparents sat there, who would usually have someone carry the meals to their own room. Shunsuke, Otami, 3 sons, old Oito, and Naokichi sat around the big table. The dining room was cool and pleasant for good ventilation, and their supper started in a merry and busy atmosphere. Shunsuke talked about how Jiro had made good progress in swimming. If he works hard as he did today, he'll beat anybody soon, he said and turned to him with a smile. Jiro was excited at his remarks and at the same time anxious to see how the other members responded to it. Sucking a fishbone, he stole a glance at them, but alas, nobody would speak out to praise him. Grandfather just went on nodding as he listened, while grandmother broke the merry atmosphere by picking up topics unrelated to it. Otami listened to the last, but was in a bad mood halfway. Naokichi burst into laughter at the point where Jiro swallowed the water. It was only old Oito who showed some interest. My, how brave you are, Jiro-chan, she said, but it sounded to him like a mere lip service. When the supper was over, Shunsuke began preparing to go back to town. Jiro was uneasy. He rushed out of his house and ran some 100 meters in the direction of his father's destination. When he came to a crossroads, he stopped to wait for Shunsuke. It was just after sunset and the road could still clearly be seen. By and by, Shunsuke's bicycle came rattling along the graveled road. Jiro stood up and called out in a loud voice, "Father!" Oh, it's you, Jiro, he said. You've been waiting out here, haven't you? He got off the bike and stroked his head. I'll be back in a week. Be careful not to go to the river by yourself, all right? You can go with me again. It had not been a waste of time to wait for his father there. In a happy mood, he saw Shunsuke pedaling away till he was not to be seen any more. Chapter 9. The School Bag. Summer was gone. It was nearly 1 month since he had returned to his house. It was true that he had become used to his new life, but it did not necessarily mean that he was spending a pleasant life there. On the contrary, he was watchful of how the other members behaved in order to read their minds from the smallest hint he heard or noticed. He seemed to have become much slyer than when he first returned. He had also become bold. He told downright lies and played tricks as long as he was sure that they would not be revealed. However, he would not eat stealthily, even if he came upon a golden opportunity. He did not forget what Shunsuke had told him at the bath. He knew that he should not deceive his father. Once in a while, Jiro even said praiseworthy things and behaved obediently toward his mother and grandmother. He little expected them to favorably accept him for that, but thought it would help at least in putting them off their guard. If it could be called a virtue to be able to do something bold after full preparation, Jiro was probably training himself in his daily life. The life of a bully, however, could make you a cruel person, couldn't it? Day after day, Jiro enjoyed twisting the buds of the trees in a well-kept garden, urinating over the flowers and holding dragonflies against his kimono only to pull their heads off. Whenever he found a frog, he never failed to stamp it to death. One day he saw a snake swallowing a frog and battered it to death after watching the whole process to his heart's content. Some other day he caught a neighbor's cat and put it under a tub with some bricks on it and left it all night. Jiro did not show his cruelty very much to human beings though, because he was too young to defeat anybody except his little brother. He would tell his mother very soon if Jiro lifted his hand against him. September set in. It was the start of the second term, and Kyoichi returned to school as a second grader. How jealous Jiro was to think of his brother. He could meet Ohama and have his head stroked or be spoken to by her every day. It was intolerable for Jiro. He wanted to get revenge on his brother by preventing him from going to school. One day he thought out a bad plan in bed. As soon as he got up the next morning, Jiro went to the toilet with Kyoichi's bag in which all his school things were kept. After relieving himself, he dropped it into the pit. He felt the excitement of an adventurer, but the moment it landed with a splat, his heart was filled with an awful repentance. He felt very sorry for what he had done. He knew that it would not be made up for, and the fear tormented him greatly that he might be found out to be the culprit. He had never felt such an uneasiness before. While Kyoichi was eating breakfast, Jiro went to and fro in the corridor leading to the toilet. He had an old newspaper in his kimono. Looking around carefully, he entered the toilet again, took out the newspaper, folded it in a square, and dropped it down over the school bag. Jiro finished his breakfast quite calmly and went to the outhouse at the back to see Naokichi chopping wood for fuel. He was watching it for half an hour or so when Kyoichi's cries came from the main house, followed by Otami's shrill voice. The next moment, old Oito came running toward Jiro, quite upset. "What happened, Jiro-chan? What happened?" he also said, wiping his nose on his sleeve, and picked up the scattered pieces of wood to lay them in a pile. "Don't you know about Kyo-san's bag, Jiro-chan?" asked Oito in a gasp. "No, I don't, no," said Jiro, pretending to be busy tidying up the wood. "Kyo-san said he put it upstairs as usual. I know nothing of it." "Please say yes if you know," said Oito. "He'll be late for school." "I don't know." "You really don't know of it, Jiro-chan?" "Definitely not." "All right, then come with me to your mother," said old Oito. "No, I won't," said Jiro, drawing back. "Your mother wants you, Jiro-chan," she said. It was what he disliked more than anything. He did not like to meet his mother because he was not so bold as to rise against her. He could not but follow the old maid with his hand clutched in hers. Up in the children's room, Otami was snatching everything in all directions, Kyoichi standing by crying loudly. On seeing Jiro, she scolded him with high-handedly. "Hand it over right now," she said. "Where did you put it?" Jiro was very calm. He tried to look as blank as possible and repeated, "I don't know." Every place was searched: the living room, the drawing room, the dining room, and even the kitchen. Very fortunately for him, nobody would go into the toilet. If the evidence was not found, it would be a victory for him. However dark and overhanging the suspicion might be, he would be safe. Second after second passed, but Jiro was quite calm. Eventually, Kyoichi refused to go to school. He did not want to go there without his textbooks. The confusion came to an end, but the gloomy atmosphere hung over the house for the rest of the day. Otami kept staring at Jiro with an angry face. To make it clear, she also went into the grandparents' room and met Oito in the kitchen again, trying every possible means she thought of. Kyoichi was always hanging over her crying. Jiro tried not to come near Otami as much as possible, and at the same time was watchful of how the other members behaved. He especially noted the looks of those who visited the toilet. Sometimes he talked to Kyoichi in a falsely familiar manner. At the end of supper, Otami reminded Jiro once again. "Don't you really know of it?" "No, I don't know anything, mother," he replied. Soon Otami went out with Kyoichi. Jiro thought that everything went all right, feeling relieved. He was even a little proud that his trick had ended successfully, but his pride did not continue very long. For the next morning he was to see Kyoichi leaving for school with a brand new bag in a restored good humor. And what was worse, after a few days he was startled at Naokichi's exclamation. While scooping up the night soil from the pit, he found it. "Madame, master's school bag's here," he cried in a shrill voice. All the family rose up at his cry, and rushed to the veranda. They saw Naokichi holding up the scoop with a dripping bag at its edge. The moment he saw it, Jiro dashed out, not considering that his behavior meant confession of his sin. Jiro stayed away for the rest of that day and returned timidly at the back door late in the afternoon. The reader is free to imagine how his mother and grandmother treated him and how he responded to them. Let me tell you this much: Jiro became much bolder and more cautious after that incident.